So I'm reading 5 short pieces from my draft of a hybrid memoir collection. And hybrid is a blend. In my memoir, it'll be a collection of short stories that are structured around my New York apartment stories and strung together with poems, quotes, dreams, and bits. First piece, Dr. B. In 1977, I began therapy with Dr. B, a resident at Columbia Psychiatric Institute. I saw him twice a week at 8 a.m. for $10 a session. We were about the same age. I was extremely attracted to him. I loved his slightly long brown hair that touched his shirt collar and his tan corduroy jacket and his soft brown leather satchel. I can't remember if there was an incident or if it was I was feeling extremely anxious. I just knew there was something wrong. I tried to explain my thoughts and feelings to Dr. B, but he didn't understand. In 1978, I was accepted into the MFA program at the Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa. I had submitted a packet of colorful dreams, a hybrid story I wrote in Elizabeth Hardwick's class, A Daughter's Dream, a poem called Solitaire, and an essay based on a dream that I was Charles Dickens' daughter. The letter came in the mail. I was ecstatic to have received a research fellowship and was prepared to spend the next 2 years of my life working on my first novel that I had already begun. 2 or 3 weeks before I was about to leave, when I had already quit my job, given up my apartment, and sold my furniture, I decided not to go. Almost everyone, including my parents and my friends, thought I was crazy. I was relieved. I had applied to graduate school because I didn't know what else to do with my life and didn't want to be stuck working as a paralegal. Besides, everyone was applying to graduate school at that time. Dr. B helped me to understand that after spending the past 2 decades of my life being uprooted, moving from place to place with my family, I didn't have to continue this pattern. For the first time since I was 13, I had roots. I developed important friendships. Having always been self-motivated, if I wanted to continue to write, I would. No home, no job, no immediate destination. I was about to embark on a journey. And the next piece, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. That Elizabeth Hardwick, who was my mentor in college, so she was an essayist, a novelist. She was the advisory editor on the New York Review of Books. And some people might know her as Robert Lowell's wife. But I think she preferred not to be known that way. This is called In the Time of Typewriters. You'll never get a job if you don't learn to type, my father said to me in high school after I quit typing class. Elizabeth Hardwick called to tell me about a part-time job working for Barbara Epstein, who was one of the 2 editors of the New York Review of Books and the editor of the Diary of Anne Frank. Although I was a terrible typist and could not take dictation, I quit my full-time job and accepted the position. What aspiring young writer would turn down a job at the New York Review of Books? Several staff members told me horror stories about Barbara and how she yelled at her assistants and sometimes made them cry. The first week she was friendly to me, but I was intimidated. No matter how I tried, I made numerous typos and disconnected the phones. My tasks included typing correspondence, making edits to the manuscripts of Gore Vidal and Edmund Wilson, and reading unsolicited manuscripts. Never having enough time to read manuscripts at work, I brought them home. Who was I to make judgments about other writers? I fell behind in my reading. One day, I arrived at the office wearing my grandmother's old mink coat. Who owns this mink coat, Barbara asked. I do, said my long, blonde-haired, blue-eyed self, she shook her head in disgust. By the third week, I dreaded going to work. Barbara had already suggested that I practice typing. I practiced for hours, but I showed no improvement. I made numerous errors and carried a bottle of whiteout in my purse. The following Friday, she called me into her office. Do you know how to type? Are you practicing? You were the worst typist I've ever hired. Get Gore on the phone and bring me a cup of black coffee. My hands trembling, I brought her the coffee and almost spilled it. Saturday morning, I was filled with panic and anxiety and called Penelope and Stuart, friends from the review. I revealed my plan to use the introduction of the Diary of Anne Frank that Barbara had written for Eleanor Roosevelt. Penelope and Stuart offered to meet me at the Fisk building on Sunday morning. We entered the empty office and I placed a copy of the introduction to the Diary of Anne Frank on Epstein's desk. With a yellow marker, I highlighted her words. Written by a young girl, and the young are not afraid of telling the truth. Made me intimately and shockingly aware of the greatest evil, the degradation of the human spirit. Beneath it, I signed my name and I wrote, I quit. Although relieved, I no longer had a job. Worse than that, I had to tell Elizabeth Hardwick. That must have been awful for you, she replied in her honey-coated Kentucky accent, and it was. The next piece is called Mink Coat. When I was 4, my grandmother had a fake mink stole with a monogram pocket made for me. It's still in a suitcase in my closet. My grandfather bought my grandmother a full-length mink coat. Years later, he bought her a new one. She gave the first one to my mother, who passed it along to me when I was a junior in college. Tan, blue eyes, blonde hair. My favorite outfit was a black danskin leotard, a denim miniskirt, lace-up leather boots, and my grandmother's mink coat. Later, when the pelts dried out, I wore the coat inside out. Silk lining, monogram pockets with a mink collar and cuffs. Older women glared at me. I understood why, but I was young and beautiful and thought I knew something about the world. This is one of my apartment pieces, and this is the last apartment in Manhattan. And some of you know this is the last place I lived, and that's before I moved to Astoria and wrote roommates. There were only 2 places I could afford. One was owned by a woman named A, and the other by a woman named Z. A lived in Manhattan, Z lived in the Bronx. A did not have a sense of humor. Z laughed all the time. I preferred Z, but she had 2 cats and I had allergies. A kept kosher. This was a tough decision, but I was looking for work and it was too far to commute from Riverdale to Manhattan. I agreed to keep kosher. A's closets were filled with giant-sized packages of toilet paper, paper plates, cups, and at least 100 travel-sized containers of Kerry lotion. 2 sinks, 2 sets of dishes and flatware. I lived in constant fear of placing the wrong plate in the wrong sink, or the right plate in the wrong sink. To avoid conflict, I ate on paper plates. So did A. She went away for Passover and taped up the kitchen cabinets. I had to keep kosher. On Sunday nights, A held an Overeaters Anonymous meeting by speakerphone. Occasionally, people came to the apartment. I had to remain in my room where I could hear the speakerphone blasting and stories that were supposed to be confidential. For an hour or so, I would leave the apartment and walk the streets or go to Salter's bookstore. I found out that A was going to buy her apartment and that my rent would go up $200 a month. I knew I had to start looking for my own apartment. I didn't want to leave Manhattan. I didn't want to keep moving from apartment to apartment. The idea depressed me. I tried, but I could no longer afford to live in the city. And the final piece I'm reading is called Home. By the time I graduated from high school, my family had lived in 5 houses, 1 duplex, and 1 apartment building. The house in Surrey Lane was a white colonial with 4 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a formal dining room, a sunroom, a kitchen with a mudroom, and a paneled playroom in the basement where a salamander lived beneath a board in the floor. We were not allowed to play in the living room unless we had permission. If we walked on the plush carpet, my mother would erase our footsteps with her vacuum cleaner. Red, yellow, and white rose bushes were intertwined along the gray driftwood fence that protected our house. Purple lilac bushes grew in the corner of the yard near the golf course. The second level of the yard sloped and was embroidered with purple and white violets, rocks, and moss. Crooked slate steps led down to the lower level where there was a swing set and 2 white birch trees. Our backyard and the strip of land between the golf course and our house were surrounded by woods. During autumn, the lower level of the yard was carpeted up to 6 inches with leaves. After hours of raking, we would dive and jump in the piles of leaves and begin raking all over again. This made my father angry, but we did it anyway. Further back in the woods was a crooked little stream where my brother and I practiced ice skating. He had difficulty skating until it was discovered that he'd been sold 2 left skates. Surrey Lane Revisited. On my way home from a Rockport, Massachusetts vacation, I visited the house in Natick that I hadn't seen since my family moved over 55 years ago. I knocked on the front door and the owner answered. I identified myself and he invited me into his home and gave me a tour of the first floor. He also allowed me to take photographs. The present owner, age 48, was born and grew up in this house. Later, he bought it from his father. He built an addition, so there were 3 levels, now worth $1.2 million. The golf course that flanked the right side was sold. The driftwood fences and the rose bushes were torn out. The birch trees were also removed from the lower lawn. JFK Junior High School had been recently renovated and could be seen from the sparsely wooded area in the backyard. The lilac bushes, the forsythia, tulips, and the vegetable garden no longer existed. The slate steps on the slope of the backyard had been covered with grass, and the purple and white violets were gone. And of course, there was no swing set. Sometimes memory is better. Thank you all for coming. So you can stay here, how about until 5 minutes to 8, then we have to get out of here. So we have about 20 minutes. And again, thank you so much for coming. Mindy, Alice, I'm pointing to the right because Darcy was sitting. Everyone did a great job, and this workshop was really